have a idea, you've created a brand, you've created a story, and now you have to create your packaging. One of the things that you want to consider with your stories is how can you tell the story related to the beer, related to something that has nothing to do with the beer but has to do with the story, and still make it visually appealing. So some of the first things you want to consider is this going to be a singular image that I'm working with? So sometimes the key to telling a fairly complex story is using elements that help tell that story. So using multiple sort of icons and images can sometimes expand the interest level and can help people really understand it. Over 30% of consumers say they're influenced by packages of labels that feature appealing, understandable descriptors. So using a descriptor is another sort of hint at a way for people to make the connection with your brand. One of the things that we've looked at a few of the beer packaging projects is whether you can get away with type on the front of your can or bottle. The simple answer is you can do whatever you like, but the more sort of when you look into it a little bit more, you actually are having to juggle quite a few things with this project. One of them is obviously you are trying to satisfy the need to design something interesting and come up with image making that is interesting, tell a brand story. And kind of as an extension of that, this work is the type of work that needs to go into your portfolio. So anytime you can prove that you can work with image and type integration, anytime you can do that, it tells a creative director that this person understands design and can handle working with multiple assets and working on projects that have a need for balance. So working with type and image will put you much further ahead than thinking that the image is going to be so awesome that you can not put the type on the front. Cape May celebrates the area around Cape Cod and sort of the different things that you see in the area. But one of the things to keep in mind that you can still balance things like image, logo, name, pattern, and if you can balance those elements, can give you a pretty cohesive brand. You really want to be able to use every element you can to tell your story. So part of your story is the type of beer, the alcohol content, the name of the beer, and the illustration or artwork or photography then illustrates that. So it's important that you use the label to balance those elements and not rely just heavily on one of those elements. It should really be a balance. Now, if your story doesn't seem to connect to what you want to do, I often sort of use what I call reverse engineering, and that just takes imagination, right? So um, part of that, part of what can help with that is a good tagline. So if you look at Olympia, and they put the Bigfoot on there, and they're, really their call to action is find your wild side. It's a pretty, there's not much that actually tells you why it's there, other than that it's sort of Olympia's in Washington, and they do have that sort of folklore history. But the more complicated your story, you just have to stop and write down what will connect that back to the Folkhouse Brewery branding. So part of that is, if you decide that you're going to have, you really want to put an elephant on your label, then it's up to you to write that story. Why is the elephant there? How does it relate back to what you wrote about Folkhouse, right? And it just takes imagination, but you have to take the time to do it. The other thing you really want to think about is, if you figured out your brand story and how that is going to evolve onto your packaging, make sure that when you're naming your beer, that you take the opportunity to really respond to what the viewer is seeing, right? So double IPA, there's two monsters, right? Behemoth, black ale, right? So red. So all of these things have very subtle references to the name and then the images. So having those two things working together is important. And some labels, it seems like it's virtually impossible to try and figure out what the story of the beer is. However, it's no different than when when you work on a brand or a logo. One of the things that we always tell our clients is, we are going to create an elevator pitch for you. And what that does is, even if it's really difficult to sort of figure out what the logo is about, an elevator pitch breaks it down into really simple terms. So you should be able to sort of write an elevator pitch about your beer packaging that ties into the Folkhouse, ties in to the story you're trying to tell. And as long as you understand that story, and you can write it out, in 10 lines, it makes it much easier to sort of look at your beer and figure out what it's lacking or what it needs, or try to present it and explain it to somebody.